done right now. I mean, that was an awesome accomplishment last Friday to get all of the SRF applications in. And I know, the design team, everyone has been just working their hearts out to get us ready to do that. So I do, respect the fact that it's a little demoralizing to, after you work your tail off to make this massive milestone, and then you come in and somebody's saying, oh, I don't think that anybody's doing any work or whatever.
That's not what I said.
So whatever,
It's about information being shared and it's not.
like what?
Like when I have to cancel a meeting because nobody's got anything to say, and then the selectmen get an update the next night. When selectmen get updates and we get nothing. And people are asking, I'll speak for myself, I don't know about the rest of the committee, but wherever I go, people are asking me questions about this. I should be able to intelligently answer their questions.
What question?
Time frames, what we're doing, when we're doing it, where we're doing it. We have a change in the map on the east end that nobody knows about. All this stuff. Why aren't we talking about it?
What change in the map?
The map from east of Parker's River has changed from what we originally discussed.
The contract sequences.
Not just the contract sequences, how it's getting to the plant, among other things. We have to worry about a budget and things keep seeming. Nobody seems to be willing to cut any roads out. Let's just keep adding roads into it. From what I see. I've expressed my frustrations for a while and nobody's listening to me.
Phase one plan that was filed with the notice of project change is still the phase one plan that we're looking at. And the layout for the sewer systems is the same.
So originally we were going to Parker's River, east of, right?
Way back over a year ago, everything was going back to pumping station 3. But when it was revised, we were looking at DHY options and this and that. That's when it was decided that that pumping station that will be in the back of the pancake man, pump that way back up to the treatment plant. It's a more direct route and it cuts down the flow capacity of the PS3. So that was laid out in the notice of project change. And described in there.
I don't remember until I saw it in Jeff's office. I don't remember seeing that map. And then I got an email, a copy of an email from somebody who talked about legal issues with rights of way or whatever it was. And does that mean there's going on private roads that we need to worry about? I want to, in my opinion, with the budget constraints that we're going to run into, we should be worrying about the major items first and not all the other side stuff.
I think that refers to the DOT project and sidewalks and all that. The right-of-way concerns, at least from the commercial side, is
I'm not talking 28, I'm talking about other side streets.
That's when we're getting into the design issues, Kurt. That hasn't been brought up and addressed before. It was brought up back in 2011. My understanding was the town had a utility right of way for even your private ones, so you put water mains and other things in there already. So the town is going to go back to your town council and look at what those utilities actually cover or what has to be done. In other communities, we've looked at it, we've listed the streets, and they did a town meeting action, was it Mike, that required them to do that easement. There's no cost utilities.
So those are details that still need to be worked out.
Yeah, so we're getting into this now as we're getting into the design.
So do we need a design update?
I just think as things happen, we should be knowing what they are. It just seems like things go in different places and we're not, I don't know. Maybe I'm the one that's wrong and I'm missing it, but
I think if there's a concern about the design, let's put it on the
it's
table.
not just design, it's everything. This committee is not, I don't know what we're sitting here for. How's that? We're supposed to be doing a job that we can't do because of different reasons. And
I mean, I think everybody that's sitting around this table is trying to get.
so I'm not trying to be adversarial. I'm not trying to pick it because I don't know if it's I don't want to say it's somebody's fault in particular. I just think we need to make a better effort that everybody around here knows what everybody else is doing. And I don't feel like that's happening. So again, when I meet with people, when I run to somebody on the street, they're asking me questions and I go, I don't know, nobody's telling me, so I don't want to keep doing that.
The next item on the agenda is a design update.
No,
Sounds like that's what we need.
I think judging by the amount of information sitting on the table, I'm hoping that this is a more comprehensive update than what I feel like. It's just my take.
And I just want to say also, I really appreciate what RAC's doing. I'm this business with the Board of Selectmen. I think we need to get the Board of Selectmen more connected to what we're doing, not less. And every time we go into the Board of Selectmen, we set it up as, these technical details are going through the RAC to the Board of Selectmen, but I'm gonna raise my hand as I'm gonna fight to do more to keep, RAC and the Board of Selectmen on the same page, not going different directions. And so I make absolutely no apologies for, I was the one that pushed when that June 1 memo came out. I wanted to go into the Board of Selectmen and start talking to them about it. And I wanted to do it with RAC. We didn't have all the information on day one, but we were able to piece it together. And I didn't see it as, an insult to RAC or anything. I think that, what we want to do is we want to have all of the technical issues go through this committee. And then on a regular basis, keep the Board of Selectmen updated. And I think everybody's happy with taking that route. So I think we're all trying to, we've got folks here at this meeting that haven't been at meetings in the past. We're tying in the whole, planning is involved, DPW is involved. We've got economic development. We've got, the town administrator, assistant town administrator. We've got the whole design team. Everybody that is interested is here. And, I think the idea, it's a complicated project, but if there's questions that people are asking that we don't have answers to, that's kind of what we were talking about on the schedule. We want to put it on so that we can talk about it and get those answers. I know it's the same thing we talked about on the land use regulation piece. And that's one area where, I'd sort of pushed to get everyone involved and then bring it through this committee, because there's questions I can't answer on it, that I want to get the answers. How are we going to be able to allocate and accommodate the flow? How is it going to be done? And so those are, but I think there's a lot that's coming together. And I just want to say, I'm with you, Kurt. All of these questions need to be answered. All the information needs to come to the table. But, we can keep the train moving and keep the information flow going, because I think a lot of times I get frustrated and I ask a question and we get the answer. And, it's something that in the design, it's developing, we just need to get the detail out there. Chuck and I just had a discussion today on vacuum sewers. Yeah, and that's a big issue. And, and we need to be facile enough with this, design so that we can, whether we're meeting with members of the business community, elected officials, any local resident that's just been, flooded with this information from neighboring communities, we should have enough information that we can, say right out that, look, phase one doesn't include a vacuum sewer system for the central business district corridor. So folks, should have confidence in that. And I just want to say, I don't want to belabor the point, because I do agree with you on a lot of respects. But I just think that, one of the things that what we're here to do is to educate ourselves on this technical information to a point where we can go out in the community and enhance people's confidence in the program. People out in the community don't want to hear that we're working in silos. That's like a code word for Keystone Cops. We don't know what we're doing. Don't support this
I'm
program.
not saying that nobody knows what they're doing. I just.
But I'm saying that it's the message, we gotta give people confidence, and so we gotta get confidence. Because you can't give anybody confidence in the direction we're going if you don't have it. And so what I'm saying is if we don't want to do this project, let's not do it, and let's tell people right now, we're not gonna do it. But I'm not gonna go out and say I want to do it, and go out and tell people I don't know what I'm doing. I think that, so if there's questions, we need to kind of put them right out there. If the map has changed and you're not happy with the map, I'll look at the map. If you want to cross
I'm not
streets,
saying I'm not happy with it. I'm not, it's not about what the information is, it's just about how clear it is and when we all see it. So that, and again, what's happening now is the public is starting to wake up. Right, they're starting to ask the questions that we knew they were gonna ask. And I think if I don't, and I'm just saying, it could be anybody. If we don't know what an answer is, we should know the person we need to go to, which, is it the OPM, is it the design team, is it town staff? You're gonna be chasing our tail trying to find out things. I think the better we can speak to the people of the public, the better we all. There are times when I don't feel, as much as I'm involved in this thing, more than probably anybody. There are days I just feel like I don't know what I need to know to express it to the people who are gonna vote on it. We need to be more on top of it. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, I'm not trying to pick a fight. I just feel like we need to move information back. All right, design update for the plant collection. What's that?
My slides might be.
So we do a presentation
Yeah.
for those items. Presentation is broken into two parts. The first part is to discuss the treatment biological process that Bill McConnell will go through. And the second part is to update on the other items that were here, the collection system, BEPA update, and regulatory permit. So
So on the treatment plant side, you might recall the last meeting in July, I talked a little bit about what the process options are for biological treatment. It's a big decision, which is why we're focusing on it right at the very beginning of design. I didn't have at that time case-specific information. I had sort of generalities about the different processes. Since that time, C.M. Smith has completed draft memo that we referred to, looking at the options, what they would be sized for, and what the ballpark costs are for Yarmouth. And then we've recommended a process, which one to go to, and I just have 5 or 6 slides that are meant to describe that memo. So as I said, this is a very important decision because it pretty much, which biological system we choose pretty much dictates the plant layout. It dictates really the biggest consumer of energy, how well the plant will actually do. And it's also the biggest single cost component. So it's sort of the main heart of the treatment plant. We were looking at sequencing batch reactors, SBRs, with a following polishing process called denitrification, and the other process was membrane bioreactors. So since last month, we've taken a field trip. I know a handful of people in here. I don't know if everyone has seen, but we went up to Kingston again. Kingston's an SBR plant that's actually under construction right now. The photo on the left is how the plant was originally built back in 2000-ish, 2001 maybe. And then on the right, that's just from Google Earth. You can see they're building 2 more SBRs to the lower right of that photo. And we were up there during the construction. And then, so that's one option. We'll keep going. And we saw what these tanks look like. And the photo on the left is a full SBR aerating and doing wastewater treatment, nitrogen removal. And on the left is actually a picture from Kingston. That's how these SBRs are equipped. So you'll see air diffusers along the bottom. There's a mixer in the middle there between the three piers that floats up and down with the water level. And that device on the upper right is called a decant. So that's pretty much the equipment of an SBR that we saw. Different manufacturers have different, different styles of that equipment, but it's basically those pieces.
Thank you.
And I talked a little bit about this last month. I don't want to repeat necessarily, but the thing about an SBR is that all the different processes that have to happen for biological nitrogen removal all happen in one tank. So in order to get nitrogen removal, you have to run wastewater through several different environmental conditions or phases. And in an SBR, it's a batch. You load the tank up and then you run all those phases through that one batch. So you're finished, then you discharge the batch and you load the next tank, the next influent load into the SBR. The main advantage, or one of the main advantages of these are that it's very flexible because all those phases, those different environments can be controlled by timer. If you want to aerate a little bit more, program. If you want to mechanically mix but not aerate a little bit more, just program it, and it's all very flexible. So it's really the advantage of an SBR for nitrogen removal.
Is that where you would use your lab work to tell you that you need to adjust those timing cycles?
Yeah. So right. So you would the plant staff will do daily or even more frequently. They'll take samples from the tanks, figure out, gee, the ammonia is higher than we want it to be. We better aerate it a little bit more. Or the ammonia is very, very low. We can probably turn back air, save energy, and maybe we need to have more mixing period. So it's part of their daily monitoring. And these days, actually, there's online permanently installed instrumentation that also helps. So it would be, just give a real time.
The probes we serve.
Yes. Yeah, so it'd be real time. You can measure ammonia in real time. You can measure nitrate in real time. Those are two key parameters for nitrogen removal. You can measure dissolved oxygen, which is kind of the key to making it work, is controlling the dissolved oxygen the right way. So yes, that's right. So denitrification filters that would follow SBRs. SBRs can do nitrogen removal to a very low level, but to achieve 3 milligrams per liter of nitrogen, all the time, every time, is right on the ragged edge of what you can do. So we recommended that if, with an SBR option, you have denitrification filters that follow. It's a polishing process that will get that last little bit of nitrogen out.
Is that the carbon source that we heard about before?
Yes. So the way nitrogen removal works biologically, you need to have the right balance of carbon and nitrogen. You can't remove nitrogen completely without enough carbon to for the bugs for the microorganisms to do their thing. And by the time you get to the denitrification filter, there's almost no carbon left. So the nitrate is there to remove, and the filter is capable of removing it, but it needs a little bit of carbon to get it done. So it's a chemical feed system. It's not a big deal. A plant like Yarmouth, it could be almost like a tote-sized, chemical containment block with a feed pump on it. It's not that big a deal, but it's important for the denitrification filter to run correctly. Mbrs are sort of different technology in terms of separating the treated effluent from the wastewater microbiology. And this is just a photo of an MBR that we designed. This is actually in New York State, and it's about 1 MGD plant. So you can see it looks a little bit different from an SBR, just physically. And it has a few different characteristics. So the main thing is that membrane bioreactors have these membranes, and we went to Cohasset, and all of these membranes you couldn't see that because they're all submerged in the biological tankage, and that's how they work. They They sit in the biological mixed liquor, the soup of microorganisms that do the wastewater treatment. And suction pumps withdraw treated effluent from the outside of the membranes into those very slender strands. Believe it or not, those are all little there's a little pipe sort of between in each and every one of those strands. A little bit of water is being pulled through. And the advantage of these is that you can get very high quality effluent in terms of suspended solids. These membranes have a very, very small pore size. So you can see 0.04 micron. It's effectively a barrier from solids leaving the tank. But that's really all membranes are. They're a solid separation device. They don't do nitrogen removal. They're a solid separation device. And in a plant that's designed to get a very low effluent nitrogen, you would have to have the process configured something like this. And this again has anoxic, means unaerated. So these are zones that don't have air being dispersed into them. And then an aerobic zone, and then an anoxic, another unaerated, and then the membranes at the end. So it sort of duplicates the same biological processes that are in an SBR. It's the same microorganisms. They're doing the same thing. It's just configured differently. And then the membranes at the end are used, instead of an SBR uses gravity to separate solids from effluent, an MBR uses membranes as a barrier for solids.
Does the SBR, the SBR, do they recycle like that shows? They don't, they generally don't.
They don't in terms of an actual pumping
Back.
system back, but it all is in that tank already. That's one of the advantages. You don't have SBRs use less power because the purpose of those recyclers is to put the microorganisms where they need to be at the right time. And in SBR, they're there.
They're there.
So you don't have to, you don't have to recycle any biomass from one zone to another. It's all happening in the same zone. So we have done, based on the flows and loads that we've developed that are in the draft memo that we referred to, we developed, preliminary sizing for these different processes, what they would have to be, and did capital cost estimating, and I'm calling it differential O&M, annual O&M, meaning that's not the overall cost of running a plant. It's the difference between the two. So for example, alternative to membranes, they have those pumps, and SBR doesn't. So that's some O&M cost in the column for MBRs. So it's a way of comparing economically, though. And then it's also true, and I think the gentleman Scott up at Cohasset was telling us that they've replaced those membranes twice at Cohasset since 2000. So we've anticipated that you'd have to replace membranes at about year 10, and with a present worth cost associated with it. And so the bottom line of the present worth cost after 20 years is you can see the alternative one is slightly more costly than alternative two on an overall present worth basis. I think at this level of precision, that's actually very similar. I would say that's not a wide enough difference on which to base a decision.
What are you suggesting in that box that doesn't have a number, $4 million?
Well, that's for replacing the membranes, that the third row down, and there are no membranes in an SBR
Right.
process. So
But
it's
there's a $4 million expense not there.
oh, I see what you're saying. No, so okay, so let me explain the table then. Capital cost on the top, differential annual O&M, so that's the cost every year to run it for 20 minutes. So every year costs $360,000 is the differential O&M. And then the present worth is the sum of the capital and the present value of 20 years of O&M. So the bottom line is not the sum of those three numbers above it. It is it's the sum of capital and 20 years of O&M.
And it's using a discounted rate, you're walking it back
Yeah,
to
Right.
present value as to what it would be today.
right.
It's I'm sort of familiar with this as the net present value
Yes.
analysis, where you're taking future costs and trying to pull them backwards to current,
Right,
to today's costs.
right. So it's 20 years of O and M. Some, and there's an interest rate assumption, so it's not 20 times 360,000. It's something less because you theoretically have money in the bank. Gaining interest. So, and then this capital O and M present worth is just a very common way to look at different options. So on the non-economic side, I think the main difference and what I guess is a preview to our recommendation is for nitrogen removal, SBRs and denitrification filters are superior. They are really just about as good as you can get with commercially available technology. Membranes are good, not as good. The other main advantage I would say of a SBR is that it is very flexible. As I mentioned, you can run it and almost limitless variation on how you run it, as opposed to a continuous flow system that has zone sizes that are literally built in concrete, and you can't make them bigger or smaller depending on load. They are what they are. The O&M requirements in terms of level of skill and effort, I think an SBR is sort of a typical process. Membrane bioreactor, I think there's more maintenance activity with those membranes. Scott was describing how they basically are constantly taking them out, putting them back. It's just one other thing that they have to worry about. Preliminary treatment requirements. This means upstream of the biological process, what has to happen. SBR is sort of a standard commercially available preliminary treatment, screening, dirt removal, nothing too extraordinary. For a membrane system, you need to have very, very fine screening of the membranes to get fouled. So it's a different level of screening. The main advantage of membranes, it must be said, is that, as I said before, there's essentially zero suspended solids coming off the membrane. So if you need to eventually go to advanced treatment for contaminants of emergent concern, or PFAS, or something that we haven't really worried about yet, an MBR would provide better pre-treatment for some of those technologies that we do that. Chemical use are both systems will need an alkalinity addition system. Both systems would need supplemental carbon, as we talked about. The membranes require sodium hypochlorite and citric acid for washing the membranes periodically. It's not a big consumption, it's just a chemical system you have to have. And site footprint comparison, SBRs are very efficient, membranes are more efficient. Membranes are very site efficient. So our recommendation is that the town should proceed with SBRs and DNet filters. The costs are comparable, but the SBRs are much more efficient and can be relied on much more robustly to remove nitrogen to remove fluid, and it's highly flexible. So that's the reason we think those are the best choice for the town. And that's what's documented in our memo. And I guess I'd like to answer any questions and we move that recommendation.
Yeah, just a question. I mean, and I have to tell you, I have much more experience with the SBRs, and in terms of the overall reliability and simplicity of function, I really support that. But also, and it's kind of funny, we're talking about answering people's questions and things. I get a lot of questions on the emerging contaminants, the whole issue of PFAS, pharmaceuticals, other things that are out there. What do we say, and how do we factor that into our thinking if we do anticipate in the future we're going to be responsible for more of these emerging contaminants?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess, a couple thoughts. The first thought is that, neither of these processes really address PFAS or anything. So regardless of which option, if and when you're required to remove one of those pollutants in the future, you're talking about adding something. Just a question of what.
Are those kind of removals more localized? They're not going to be system-wide.
I'm not.
We're talking about remediating those other types of contamination. You are finding them in very specific locales. They're not everywhere. They're not going to be collected by every hookup. So you're basically talking
Yeah.
about moving it to a treatment facility separate from the sources.
Or I guess, or source control, right? It's kind of what you're saying, is prevented from getting into the sewer in the first
I'm just saying,
place.
you're not going to build a plant to treat PFAS if you're not going to run it through the sewer system. But you could have a facility on the same site that treats PFAS contaminated effluent and treat it sort of on a batch basis and get it in and get it out.
And if you're talking about like a particular, say a commercial source or an industrial source that is highly concentrated PFAS, for example, I think you're right. That's what you would do. I think the problem is if you have a trace of PFAS that seems to be coming from somewhere you don't know where.
Not to
And-
discount Bob's concern, because we all get it. So we're gonna be trying to sell a sewer system there. So what about the PFAS? Forget about the PFAS. We're talking about the sewer system right now. Eventually we'll get to those other issues, but right now this is what we're talking about. You can't afford to get sidelined by those kind of questions, those kind of concerns. You have to figure out how to address them. But I'm not sure they fit into.
I think our thought was the site at Buck Island Road is large enough to have space set aside for a future tertiary or more advanced treatment system, if and when it ever needs to happen.
And if when the state says you have to do it locally,
Right.
we just take the whole thing to Otis Air Force Base and call it a day.
Right, but maybe we will, maybe we won't. I think what he's trying to say is, I know he's having difficulty getting out 2 words, but what we're talking about is whether you go with the SBR or the membrane system, in the event that through regulation change, it requires more advanced treatment, in either of those options, you're talking additional construction,
Absolutely.
or maybe a system to take it to another place to base, or which it's just trying to get the decision between SBR and the membrane is not driven by either one's facility with the emerging contaminants, because there would be additional treatment required in both cases.
Correct. Right.
See the other one?
No, I got that. That was pretty evident from,
Right,
From
we're
the
just trying to
get-go.
break it down.
but maybe to come back full circle and address with some of the concerns Kurt had, is we're not going to be experts on any of this stuff. The best thing we can do is read the executive summaries and conclusions these guys prepared, make sure there's enough information in there to justify their recommendation, and then pass judgment on it. But first, sit here, seriously say SBR is better than MBR. I'm not there. I'm not sure I'm ever going to get there, but I've seen enough material, information they presented in the material here to suggest that they've making a sound recommendation. And all I can do is accept it, pass it along as my recommendation to the committee we're responsible to as a selectman. And that's where I came down on this. I could spend hours trying to dissect this thing. But all of us have had experience in state government, town government, any kind of large organization knows that if it ain't in the executive summary, you ain't gonna find it in the rest of the material.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind, the number one reason you're doing this program is to remove nitrogen. So when we looked at cost and non-cost factors, we felt the SBRs were the number one process to remove nitrogen. Both of them are going to require additional processes to remove chemicals of emerging concern, PFAS, whatever else may come about. So
I would
that's
have-
how we factored that in.
I would have some more pedestrian type concerns like So Hingham's got an SBR, or Hanover has an SBR, right? Type facility. So we have proof of concept. You have to be determined what everybody else is gonna be on the Cape, but what are the other 10 gonna most likely look like? Are we gonna be the only SBR on the Cape, or is
No.
pretty much everyone's gonna end up there, right? And the number one question that everybody's gonna ask who's on the west side of town is, what's Dennis doing? Because if they're doing something different, then maybe we're wrong. So let's get down to the practical considerations as well as the technical ones.
If they're doing something different, they're wrong. That's.
Yeah.
Well, that's not how you look at it, right? I mean, everybody's own family is wrong. It's the guy across the street that's right.
Yeah, and the SBRs are a long proven technology.
Yeah.
We're not recommending anything that, you know.
I think you made a pretty good case for the additional, if I'm not mistaken, the way I read it, it's more expensive, right?
Yeah, although, like I said, at this
In the
early
long run.
stage, I think
It's
those
fun.
costs are.
I'm more concerned about the competitiveness of the materials and personnel that we're going to require to run these things. Right, because that's going to drive cost up too. You can say it's only going to cost you $35 million, but I can't find somebody to run it and I can't get the materials to do the processing. It's going to cost me a lot more than that in the future. And if that's because 9 other towns, the facilities are all trying to do the exact same thing at the exact same time. You can't possibly incorporate that into this analysis. So I'm not saying you should, but we're heading down the right direction. I think we're all on that same road. Okay. You guys kind of know where I came down on this conversation, on this kind of decision.
I'd like to add, we only had the memorandum for less than a week, but we did an initial evaluation, and we agreed with CDM Smith's recommendation, primarily because of the varying influence that you're going to have, the seasonal load. The SBR makes that flexibility a lot more easy to operate with the
So you can
changes in
store it
flow.
and then when you get a batch, run the batch. Is that what you're talking
Or
about?
the tank doesn't fill quite as much when during low flows. You don't need, I think you were proposing 3 SBRs initially.
The initial, but 4, I think this is based on 4 because of the closing load variation.
So you can actually
Pretty
take some
extreme.
offline and still operate it with 2 in the winter and then go 4 in the summer.
Get the concept. All the pizza shops only have 4 ovens. They use 2 in the winter and 4 in the summer.
But I think for the public, I think they will be able to grasp that idea that our, influent coming in the summer is, I don't know whether it's double what it would typically be in the off season, but having the capacity to shut down one of the tanks and not get routine maintenance done on it, or just not operate it, which saves utility costs.
Mhm.
The maximum capacity we gotta fit up for is for the peak season, our 6 months when everyone's here. But then we have the ability, the flexibility to take some things offline and not operate them. And keep them up and going from a maintenance point of view, so that I can see where the public could easily understand that concept, where when we went to Cohasset, I mean, it's one big pipe coming in and one pipe going out. And the constraint, if I understood it correctly, when what we were seeing, that kind of MBR doesn't give the same kind of flexibility that we would need seasonally, given all of the difference in the amount of consumption of water.
Yeah, and I think the complexity of the operation is such that taking units on offline or putting them back online is much bigger deal than it is with SPR. Yeah.
So that was a much smaller plant too.
Yeah, it's
Oh, it was
yeah,
a tiny little.
yeah,
tiny little.
right, much smaller.
But the visit to Kingston was really terrific, and thank you for that, because we could see the empty tank, we could see the full tank. We could see how it works, we could see underneath.
Mhm.
It was, it's very helpful when you read the report. You could reflect back on the fact that you actually saw it.
Comment, having
Thank you.
gone on the tour, I saw something by way of a complexity that I didn't anticipate. I like the recommendation. I think it is the right way to go for the town. Problem I saw with the Cohasset plant,
in 2 plants in my life, so I'm not an expert. But I saw a plant that was very dependent on an extraordinarily talented individual.
Yes.
And I get the feeling that as the years unravel, finding the talent to run whatever plant the town builds is going to become an increasing challenge. This is not a career field that a lot of people go into. And when we make this decision, I think the old axiom, keep it simple, whatever, it's clear that the SBR process works as well, if not better, and it is simpler. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at those 2 plants in comparison and see a significant difference in complexity. And I'm also worried that we have this, observe, we have this enormous peak for maybe 60 days a year. We actually have 3 seasons in town. We have winter, we have the 6 months when snowbirds, et cetera, and then we have summer season. And I don't know what the real numbers will be, but there's a spike that is very significant. And to have a system that can accommodate drastic upticks, we are Provincetown on steroids is what I think Yarmouth is as we go forward.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I don't have the numbers in my head, but the floating loads that we evaluated based on water use and a handful of other, the summertime use it's easily, summertime average is easily 3 times the winter average, maybe a little bit more. I don't have those numbers, but it's tricky to conceptualize something that address that.
And 4th of July weekend, it could be 8 times.
Right.
George, do you have any comments or
No
questions? No?
Just listening.
Okay. Anybody else have questions or comments on the 2 processes?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think you've heard from the design team, the designer, the SPR with the D-night filters, their recommendation. Also heard the OPM in their short review is supportive of that. And I'd like to go on the record saying the DPW staff will have to oversee the operations is also supportive of that SPR with D-night filters.
Okay. Anybody care to make a motion to that? To recommend the SBR?
I'll make a motion to support this.
Second. Any more discussion? Actually, I do have to do a roll call on this because Mary's out there.
I'm here.
Myself, I, George, I, John, I, Spiro,
Aye.
Joanne,
Yes.
Tom. Aye. Mary,
Aye,
you can raise your hand if you want.
aye,
Never mind.
aye.
There she goes.
Aye. Okay. Very good. Thank you all.
I'm sorry, who made the motions? I missed that.
I just.
John.
And who second? You
Spiro.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so
Proceeding.
I guess we're up to the supplemental environmental impact statement.
What collections is the pleasure here?
Oh, we only did the plant, that's right.
Back to the,
Yes, please. Thanks. Tom.
Realize that's difficult to read on the screen, but there were 11 by 17, but we want you to have it better.
Anybody want that?
Yeah, who didn't get one?
Is that-
John, did you get this one?
No, I didn't.
Sorry.
You included the figure in his
The
agenda,
OPM paper was the same figure.
and the whole presentation. Presentation slides are copied there as well, and then the whole packet. That's the whole-
Yeah, you got one?
I'm all set. I can see the
You
screen.
probably know it by heart.
Great. Again, I'm Mike Judici from CDM Smith. I'll just walk through quickly some of the collection systems and other submittals that we have made in the last week or so. I'm sure we'll jump in with any questions. So the figure here is showing the phase one collection system as part of the SRF process that we'll get into in a little bit. We had to delineate contracts. That's how they like to see it, rather than just one big number for phase one. They want to see what we envision the construction contracts looking like. And again, this is a vision as we sit here today. It doesn't mean this is set in stone and it can't change as we move through the design process. So basically, we broke the phase one up into 6 separate construction packages that we envision it would be the way it'll roll out once we get to that point. Contract 1 would be the treatment plant. Contract 2 is a portion of the collection system east of Parkers River. Contract 3 is the remaining portion of that piece of the system. And the reason we broke that area up is it's a pretty large area, and for a construction contract that large, I think it would limit your field of bidders that were able to bid on that. So just based on our judgment and experience, we thought breaking that area into 2 separate construction contracts put the size of the contracts in a good place that would maximize the bidders, construction contractors would be able to bid on the project. If you make it too big, then some of the medium-sized contractors that are pretty good at what they do would be beyond their bonding capacity potentially. So that's contracts 2 and 3. And again, how those are broken up was based on the way the system is designed at the moment in terms of where the pumping stations are located and the way the gravity sewer lays out based on the topography. One thing I will point out, as you know, on contract, as we're showing in a contract 3 on South Shore Drive, it's included in that first phase. The initial concept, we had 2 pumping stations to serve that area. That's how it was originally laid out. Based on the topography that we've received from the survey, we've evaluated that and walked through it with town staff and come up with an option that allowed us to eliminate one of those 2 pumping stations so that we feel we can serve South Shore Drive with just 1 centrally located pumping station as opposed to 2 there. So some savings are happening as we go through the design process. Contract 4 we're showing as the Route 28 North Main Street, Old Main Street intersection. And again, that coincides with one of the 2 MassDOT projects. So that one is further up in the queue. So that work would be considered a separate contract for the purposes of SRF. But again, the intent is for that to be included as part of that MassDOT intersection project. Contract 5 we're showing as the Route 28 West, as we call it, everything between Barnstable and Parkers River. That was the original phase 1 back 10, 12 years ago. Again, that's all to be included. The intent is to include that with the MassDOT roadway project in that area. So that's why that's singled out as a separate contract. And then contract 6 is meant to sort of be a catch-all, because associated with that Route 28 West project, there are 3 pumping stations that would not be part of the MassDOT project. So there's going to have to be a separate town project to bid those pumping stations. There may be some of the side streets outside of the MassDOT project as well that the town may want to include as part of phase 1. So that was the intent of that contract 6, just to pick up anything outside of the MassDOT work. We did talk about potentially lumping the pumping stations together in one project, so to be bid. So potentially even the pumping station or both pumping stations in the Parkers River East project could potentially be rolled into the same contract with some of the other ones, just to gain some economies of scale. So that's how that was laid out. And you'll see that through the SRF PEF submittal that we get into as well. Again, they want to see contracts as they're intended to be laid out. So this is a sort of a snapshot of some of the information that we had to provide to DEP as part of the SRF application. Again, each of the 6 contracts, as we've just described. Those are our best guesses as what those would look like at this point. The caveat that, you know, contracts 5 and 6, and to some extent contract 4, are dependent on MassDOT. And if we're going to be including the sewer as part of those contracts, then we're obviously have to roll in with their schedule for those contracts as well.
These are all I know is 2-year windows. That's it.
Again, at this point, we're just for estimating purposes, assuming the 2-year construction window. Some, you know, part of the Route 28 projects, the difficulty is we've talked about is, you know, during the summertime, you can't do the work on 28. That was one of the other benefits of breaking up those other 2 contracts as well.
So which is more ambition, the construction start date or the duration?
Which is more ambitious.
Any chance it's going to start 7/1/23?
That's the hope, that's the goal.
The goal on contracts 2 and 3 is to get that moving before the MassDOT projects do, so you don't have Route 28 under construction all at once.
From end to end. So that's the goal, to get those out under construction next year.
So somebody did ask me a question. Basically, you're not gonna tear up Route 28. Well, I know we can't tear up in July, but what work would be done during July and August?
So that's part of the benefit. And if you look at your figures, I don't want to touch the. We go back to the figures. So that was part of the other rationale in breaking these up the way we did, is that each of the contracts would have work outside of Route 28, the contractor could work on during the summer season. So that's a great question. And as you can see, it's, you know, 28. That would have been one other approach, make 28 one construction contract and everything else, but then you're limiting that contractor. There is nothing else to do in the summer season. So by breaking it up this way, in addition to the pumping station, potentially you could do some of the side streets during the summertime.
And I know, well, from my standpoint, I think it was Chapel House had that huge excavator. Which was like 30 feet around. So I just think if you have to mobilize that kind of equipment, it makes it difficult, or it could be difficult. And I thought maybe that's what you had. I don't know. Do you think there's a chance of 2 of those machines, or are we not going that deep?
We are not trying to go that deep. We went that deep in Harwich because the town decided after the preliminary design that they didn't want any pressure sewers in that base. So we had to make the pipe deeper to keep everything gravity.
Yeah, that allowed us to eliminate a really large pumping station that would have been right up the street from another large pumping station.
And obviously, if you're not digging that deep, you can lay more pipe in a day, which
Right. Shallow you are, the more production you get.
the
Absolutely.
compaction and everything you have to do for what, 28, 30-foot deep trench. I know they've got almost nothing done. It seemed like almost nothing done in a day because
Pretty slow going when you're
Yes.
20, we were 24, 25 feet deep.
Yeah, okay.
Not quite the 30, but yeah. And that's usually the 20 feet is when you start to look at, okay, does it make sense to go this deep versus put in a pumping station? In that case, it did. You know, we evaluated the deeper sewer versus the large pumping station. Putting in the gravity sewer made much more sense. for a lot of-
DOT is going to keep us off Route 28 in the summer.
Right.
We're going to keep ourselves off for Shore Drive during the summer.
Well, that came up in our discussions a few weeks ago as well. That's a town decision.
Yeah, to be
obviously,
determined.
and yeah, that's,
What the impact's gonna look like, the more restrictions you have, which it certainly maybe makes sense in that area, but the more restrictions you have, the longer it's gonna take. So to your question about the duration.
Right.
You can put a lot of restrictions on it, the
It's just-
duration's gonna
it's just
go
that you have,
3,
like-
4 years.
Agreed. You know your business. I don't like to pretend to tell you
No,
what to do, but there's nobody on it in the winter and everybody's on it in summer.
Yeah.
So you might make up all that lost time in the winter because there's really no traffic down there.
And there are restrictions on Route 28 in wintertime as well. And we don't necessarily have to have those same ones on the Yarmouth roads if we so choose.
small windows on 28 work. So it's going to be a challenge. So your question is well founded. The 2-year construction window probably overly
Optimistic.
optimistic, I would say. But again, it's not set in stone, it's just something that we had to include with the submittal, so that's how we laid it out.
Yeah, that's something that when you're holding your neighborhood committee meetings and you improve that neighborhood, discuss, you want us to get in and get it done quicker? Or do you want us to drag it out longer by not working summers? There's the trade-offs. Seek their input.
Excellent.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'm sure you get both of them.
Oh, sure.
So as Lou had alluded to, and Bob as well, so this is a figure that shows essentially the main milestones in the SRF, the state revolving fund process. Not going to go through all of them, but a couple of the key points. The first bullet, the first bubble, if you will, is the whole start of the process, the project evaluation forms, the PDFs. That was submitted last Friday. The deadline was noon last Friday. We did submit both for water, sewer and water, I might add. So we didn't cover it earlier, but it's, I think you know by now, separate from the sewer work, because 28 is going to be torn up under these projects, the town's decided to move forward with improvements to the water system as well. So we did put together the project evaluation form for water. It's two different programs, two different submittals, one for clean water, which is wastewater, one for drinking water for the water work. So we submitted those both on Friday. So that starts the process. As you can imagine, there are hundreds of communities, or hundreds of projects that communities submit to DEP. So those all went in on Friday. Now they evaluate them and they score them based on the ranking criteria. So the higher you score, the higher you end up on the list, the more chance you have of getting funding for your particular project. So, just based on our experience, we think the projects will rank very high in their list of projects when it comes out. So that's the next step. They issue what they call the IUP that Lou had mentioned. That's the intended use plan. That's all the projects that DEP, based on their scoring from the PDFs, have determined they have the money to fund for this cycle. And this happens every year. It's an ongoing process every year. So that list usually comes out in January. Sometimes it's been a little bit later than that, but typically it'll come out in January. So you'll have all the projects scored high to low, and it tells you which ones are going to get funding from the state. The next critical milestone in the process, as we talked about before, is if you are on that intended use plan list in January, then by June 30th of next year, you have to have your funding approved. So that's the intention of going to town meeting in April to get the construction funds in place. If that doesn't happen, then you essentially fall off the list. And then after that happens, there's an actual application that gets submitted, which has a lot more information, detailed information about the projects. It's not included in the PDF. That gets submitted. The deadline for that is typically October 15th. It will be next year, 2023. And then the contracts for construction would need to be executed by June of the following year. So in this case, it would be June 30th, 2024. You need to have construction contracts in place in order to qualify for sort of debt forgiveness. So those are kind of the key milestones, and there are other steps and processes that happen along the way as part of the program.
So if we're going to start construction next summer sometime, we're obviously mostly way ahead of that part of the timeline.
For those particular contracts, yes.
How much are we talking about?
How much in terms of
We're applying for,
the dollar amount?
Yeah.
Total dollar amount? I think the updated,
We had to update from the prior one, which was 162 million, I believe. But with all the inflation and the cost factors, and now adding another 3 years out. So we're looking at midpoint 2025 for costs now. I think it came out to 209 million.
sure, so.
couple hundred.
Yep.
Rounding out these.
And those 10 circles, the two key circles are funding approval by June of 2023, and all those contracts need to be awarded by June of 2024. So when you saw the previous one, the two asterisk ones of MassDOT, which I think you're getting an update from MassDOT tomorrow night.
I heard that's been, yeah.
Maybe the 30th at this point, it's been postponed.
Yeah, we are in contact with their designers and the different staff for those, trying to coordinate the dates, but those will be the keys, because that project to the west seems to be being pushed out. So the word you need to give them is part of our SRF, we need to start.
This is a Mass DEP run fund program.
Correct.
Is that where the dose sits as well? Is that where it gets appropriated, Mass DEP?
All right. So all of the, even the bipartisan infrastructure, all that money, I don't know, 100% of it, I think the vast majority of it's going to get funneled through the SRF project. So they have their appropriation every year. They get funded through EPA, but now there's additional money this year for the next several years based on the infrastructure.
So that would look like principal forgiveness as part of that program, which we expect to have some principal forgiveness anyway, but this will be additional.
Does anybody have a sense of what, with the additional funding, what additional benefit we get?
They revise
Just
it
a
every
guess.
year based on your per capita income. They have 3 tiers, and they do their principal forgiveness off of those tiers as to how many are in them. So it's ranged from 3, I think, up to 9% last year. Prior years, it's been like 2 to 6%. So as they get more money, they try to put more and funnel it into that program. The other thing to keep in mind is for you to access money through the Cape and Island Water Protection Fund, you need to be on this SRF list.
Okay, so the clean water fund is separate from SRF, so there's 2 pools.
No, Clean Water Fund, well, you're talking the Cape and Island Protected, that is separate money.
From
But they use
SRF.
the rating, yes, but
Of
they use the
SRF.
rating system through SRF.
So generally saying the faster we go, not only the cheaper we'll be, but the more reimbursement forgiveness, cheaper financing.
And hopefully
We'll
we
get
get
as well.
everything else.
Potentially, it's hard to tell year to year what they're going to do. But
It's a general principle. I mean,
Sure.
running a race, basically. The faster we get to the finish line, cheaper this whole
Especially
thing
with
will turn out to be,
So,
including cheaper financing and forgiveness.
Yes.
So
Well, should be stated, it makes it extraordinarily difficult to work on, some of the things that we have to finalize is, what are the exact betterments amounts going to be? What are the exact, revenues that we're going to get from, and we have so many different sources of funds that, if you take a look at it, really one of the most important circles is that loan repayment box. And, it's difficult if you don't have any advanced knowledge of the loan forgiveness from all of the additional funds that are being pumped through SRF. You don't have any, examples of the potential soft costs that they had announced that they were going to try to cover. It makes it very difficult to finalize the financial plan. And, we're going to have to be conservative. I hate to say it, but
well, in terms of our pricing, we can be conservative. I'm just sort of staring $100 million discount in the face here and saying, "You gotta hurry up and get there," right? If we could get 200 out of almost $500 million worth of construction scheduled for 2025 as a program, willing to loan us that amount of money and then possibly forgive half of it. That's 25 to 20% discount on the overall project cost.
right. And
So
you get that point, but the thing
don't
I'm saying is
factor it in.
if you can't factor.
Right, don't factor it in. Price your business where you're gonna price it. If it comes through, then you can always discount.
That's what we're looking
But we're not gonna screw around with town meeting and say, well, we'll talk about it in the fall because we might miss out on $100 million.
Well, that's my concern, because every time we talk about a number, right, 11 years ago, we were $58 million. then it was 90, then it was 100 and something, then it was 160, now it's over 2. There's a point where the public cannot absorb whatever their shares is gonna be. And this has been one of my big concerns. If we have to say, you know what, tough luck, so you're not getting sewers, because I don't care if we do it today or tomorrow or the next 10 years. Right now, we just can't afford to do it. So my feeling is if we have to say, we're not gonna do all 6 contracts, we're gonna do 4 or 5, whatever it is, I don't know. I do know there's a lot of people sitting on their hands waiting to see what the town does with this, because the talk about investment potential is there. It's not just a dream. People are saying, yeah, I will do 1 or 2 things. I'm gonna invest a lot of money, or I'm gonna sell my property who wants to invest to somebody who wants to invest a lot of money.
I'd like to have that discussion at a future meeting, but I don't want to base any of this stuff on
But it's
future
part of
growth.
But it is part of.
Assuming we can get any, we still have to fulfill the environmental mandate.
Oh, I agree. Again, like I said, for years, it's environmental project, and economic benefits help pay for it.
Right, exactly. And the thing that you know, if you're looking at this, the contract 1 is way bigger than any of the other contracts. So you're in trouble if you do contract 1 and you don't have enough customers to pay for it, because it's contracts 2, 3, 4, and especially 5 that are gonna be paying for contract 1. So, you know, you deal with that too.
Yeah, the schedule reflects that. Basically saying, hurry up and build a collection system even before we build the plant. So.
Yeah, well, that's part of the equation too. You want to balance. You don't want to have a plant sitting there, with no
Nothing
flow
to
getting
do,
to it. You don't want to have a collection system with nowhere to go. So the coordination with both the design and construction schedule is all something that we're all going to be working on moving forward. Partnership with the town. Okay. Next, please. And then I think you've seen this before, so qualify for 0% interest in the SRF project program. There are 5 criteria. 1, nutrient reduction, obviously that's that box is checked. No violations of Mass DEP orders, that box is checked as well. The MEPA certificate on the CW1P, as Lou mentioned earlier, we submitted the supplemental EIR today to help satisfy that requirement. So that's under review now. I think they have a 30-day review period on the state end. The 208 plan consistency, that comes after MEPA. We'll submit to them. I believe.
Yeah, they essentially had no comments. We've already met the 10 criteria for consistency review that they reviewed, so that should be fairly straightforward.
And then the last piece is land use controls. I know that came up earlier in terms of where that stands and where that's going and what the schedule for that is.
Yeah, I mean, we work with you. A draft has been developed. Kathy and Karen spent a lot of time working on the projected flows and from where they come from. So the next piece is to bring that land use controls back up. That draft was developed off ones that had been approved in Harwich, Mansfield, Foxborough, and Norton. So the piece that's missing is how you want to divide up that build out flow. Is it just by watersheds? Want to do it by sewer service areas, which are probably likely to change going forward in the future at some point, or some other means, zoning districts, whatever it may be. That's a town decision, and then a means for how you allocate the flow within those districts that you choose to refine it. Philosophy that the other towns did was pick the bigger area, because then you're not as constrained, meaning do it by watershed, so to speak. But then I think it was 1,000 extra bedrooms, Kathy, in there. You know, how do you allocate those 1,000 bedrooms? Do you just do it a third, a third, a third, or do you do it by land area? How do you want to do that so that then we create the table in there that says, you know, Bass River watershed is going to get X more gallons and build out. Parker's River is going to get X more, and then you have internal controls as to how you allocate that out when someone comes in with a development. The whole goal and the requirement the state puts in here is they want to make sure you manage to those flow structures. Not you put the sewer in the ground and then invite, 3-4 billion gallon facilities to come into town, so to speak. So that's the land use controls, the schedule for that. As we've discussed previously, you need to have that approved by DEP and the State Housing Authority. And then be able to say, when we do the final application, that you have that, so that that's the final box checked for you qualifying for 0% interest loans. And that's when they give you the rate schedule saying, yes, you're getting 0%. State is obligated to give out 1/3 of their SRF money as 0%. But as it obviously becomes much more competitive, they're stretching that as far as they can. Some projects have qualified as all 0% in the past. As more communities start applying for that, particularly here on the Cape, they may start to go back more towards that 1/3 and say your treatment plant is 0%, your collection system's the 2.2. That's the type of thing you won't know until you actually formalize the application and get their loan repayment schedules back. So
And that
this
date
fall,
that
we should be talking about land use controls.
Well, and I want to highlight the efforts of the community development department. Kathy has done great work on it, and we've got a team involved, and we have a meeting, I think, set up that we're going to talk about the allocation.
On September 7th, we're going to get our team together and start looking at that again. You had already done a great job of distributing by phase within each watershed and adding the 1,000 in. I think it's revisiting that, talking through how we want to deal with how we allocate those funds. And also looking more closely at sewer regulation. When do you need something for the SRF? or land use control?
Well, we would need to submit something to DEP and the State Housing Authority for them to review once you're comfortable with the draft. They then need to approve it, and then they send it back to the town sewer commissioners, the selectmen, for that to have them adopted. Question for you folks is, do you want the selectmen to be part of that draft before it gets sent to DEP?
When, I mean, I think.
If you draft it in this fall, we send it by the end of the year up to DEP. That should give you plenty of time for them to address it over the winter. Get it back to you in the
Okay.
spring. We'd have it for the applications.
Okay, so the application is due,
It's due formally by October of 2023.
okay,
But if we are doing those first two contracts early, we have to have the application in before those contracts
right,
are awarded. So that would be June.
okay,
So that's what I'm saying. If
And then
we
you
get it to
just work
DEP by
backwards,
the end of
right?
the year,
yeah,
that should be plenty of time.
6 months to,
My thought was that what we would be doing, there's a lot of information that's been developed already. We had some preliminary discussions about that. We get our team together, come up with our table, how we're gonna allocate it. What I'd like to do, and I want to hear you guys weigh in on this, is it would be my anticipation that we would get this team of departments to hone down that draft, bring it through RAC, have this committee look at it, send it to if you guys are satisfied with it, send it over to the selectmen for review and comment. And then once we've had it go through RAC and have the selectmen have the comment, we've got the staff that's set with it. That would be the point where we would send it out to DEP. And I think that way everybody knows right up front, we have sort of the public process, and we can talk about that allocation, because I think there's a lot of concern that people have is, what are we gonna have for allocation? Are we allowed to purchase property in one watershed and transfer the flow to another? How does that all work? And I think that's the piece that we need to, like you were saying, break down the silos, get our team looking at it and come back here.
Yeah, because one of my questions, and you made a point too, from years ago, people used to ask, oh, so I can have more bedrooms. I mean, right, which obviously is part of this whole decision, we didn't want those extra bedrooms. So that's the other question I thought as you were speaking is any of this able to be modified in the future? Or is it, once you do this, you're done? As far as once you assign your flows to certain places. Anybody have done this before?
Yeah, I know there are currently in your draft means for modifying them, means for moving flow from one, if it's allocated by watershed, from one watershed to another. And the criteria for making those changes becomes more stringent. So such as the last one, which requires vote of the Board of Health and then approval of town meeting. Versus the first one, if it's just reallocating within a watershed, it's a vote of your wastewater commissioners, sewer commissioners, the select.
Sorry if I lost you, but you're talking about reallocation of growth of flow.
Yeah.
Not absolute, not reducing flow someplace. and
Are you talking
someplace.
increasing flow versus what's
Well, either way,
projected?
you know, it's always that scenario, what if, right? If somebody has a great project and we didn't anticipate it in a certain place, how hard is it to move flow? So you're saying in one scenario it's easy, another scenario it requires a lot of approval.
If you're moving flow within a watershed that's been allocated,
No problem.
it's easier. If you want to move that flow to another watershed, it's the middle tier. If you want to pick up an area that's outside a watershed that wasn't envisioned to be sewered, it's more stringent.
I'm just curious at that.
If you wanted to increase your 3 million, 3.6 million to 4.6 million, who knows what that process is
Yeah,
going to be down the road.
Yeah.
These are the guidelines today. Are they going to be the same in 10
I'm
years?
still talking about
Those, yeah.
reallocation of growth in flow, right? Because otherwise we could just be walking around reducing flow everywhere and get under the TDMLs and call it a day.
Well, Harwich, they limited the, for all the residents, the flow as of a given date. That was your flow allocation.
So run a lot of water before they take.
It's the same as Chatham.
Harwich
Chatham
County,
limited,
Chatham.
to whatever the flow was, and I forget the date, let's say July 1 of 2016. That's what the flow allocation was.
Because otherwise, I mean, we're in an extremely ironic position of financing, treating our effluent by creating more of it. So we're gonna, double our flow so we can pay for the treatment of the original flow.
And even outside of the ship though, I mean,
Somebody's gonna look at us and go, what are you guys talking about?
you gotta remember the government survives on new growth. 2.5
Well,
doesn't make it, so they always.
There's the non-effluent generating growth.
Mhm.
You want to put some shopping center on Route 28.
Sure.
And then there's the effluent generating growth that you're talking about more houses and more bedrooms, right? Which growth do you want?
But I think that's right, and there's a balance.
One has a much bigger net revenue stream to the town than the other.
I don't disagree. I'm just thinking out loud a little bit about what some of the things that could happen in the future. Can they or can't they?
The majority of the build out is along Route 28 and South Shore Drive, obviously.
Commercially.
I mean, by and large, most residential lots are already built on,
Yeah, there's only single houses going here and there mostly.
Well, restricted by the size of the septic systems they could create. They just took the cap off of that.
well, that's why there was
I
1,000
can easily get a couple
allocated.
more bedrooms on my lot.
Increased bedrooms, you have to figure out how that's going to be allocated.
Right, but that's the real fuss, right? And in the process of creating a bedroom, you're creating effluent.
Next. Then just a quick overview of status. I think we've hit on most of these points. So as a team, the applications for the PEFs for both clean water and drinking water were submitted last Friday.
Yeah, just to explain that a little more. The clean water program does not pay for water mains. And you're putting in a new water main along Route 28. So it's part of your sewer program, rip the road up once with the water main in. So the only way to get the water main considered for the low interest loan was to file that under the drinking water program, which does pay for water mains.
So two separate programs basically run
Yes.
similarly.
Correct. Yeah, it's identical, but different purposes. Correct. So they both went in on Friday as required. And then I indicated earlier that the supplemental EIR that was just submitted today. There are 2 filing periods every month, the 1st and the 15th. So that went into NEPA, Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act office today. So that's hopefully the last step in the approval of the CWMP and notice project change.
And notices of the filing were sent to all the contacts for the environmental justice communities that fall within the island, which is a new requirement.
And then comments.
And when do you hear back from NEPA on that? Are they comment or they just approve it up on them?
No, they have, it's a minimum 30-day comment period. They can sometimes ask for another extension, 15 days, 45, and then they have to issue a certificate or a finding. And it's 15 days after that. So that's why we said the next couple of months type of thing. As soon as we get that, then we would file it with the Cape Cod Commission for that 208 consistency review. If there's one more slide, too.
And then in terms of permitting, we submitted the groundwater discharge permit at the end of July to DEP as well.
The effluent recharge site, has that work already been done? Or is that part of what was done, what, 11 years ago now?
Yeah, we did the hydrogeologic report back in 2011. It was never filed with DEP. When the town didn't vote the construction money, we were told to just stop the project. So that's been updated with a cover letter to it that filled in some of the missing holes, updated the flows. So that was submitted with the former hydrogeologic report, which had all the computer modeling of the site attached to it. DEP held a site visit, walked that site. I think it was last week, might have been the end of the week before, because they also did a site inspection at your septic treatment plant. So they have it. We know they started to look at it. We don't know their timeline, but we needed to get that in front of them so that they would consider your SRF applications, the PEF. Otherwise, they sometimes don't look at that if they know it's a submittal for something that doesn't have an approved treatment facility and recharge center.
Because again, some of the public questions from that area have been concerns about what will the groundwater do to their property? Will they end up with water in the basement? Or I'm sure some of the people probably have marginal distance to the water table already, so.
Yeah, no, most of
what
the, that's the
boundary
thing they
might
look
be.
at is what are the offsite impacts, but all the groundwater flows south from that site down into Seine Pond. That was the recommendation and one of the reasons for opening up the Parkers River Bridge even more. So that's what they look at is the evaluation of any potential offsite. Flashes Brook runs along there, so that will where a lot of the groundwater that's recharged daylight go down Flashes Brook instead of going to the other side, which is where the residential.
Right, like the circuit roads, Lake Roads, all that area near Winslow Gray and Buck Island. I saw those people.
So that offsite
Little
impact has been analyzed,
Yes,
and you've determined that it's not gonna flood those neighborhoods he's talking about?
we feel it's all within what they consider acceptable standards. It was all documented in that report and all of this submitted.
That's what I told somebody, but it's been, I know this was originally done back when or not. Right, there's no update recently, it's just based on 2011.
For the vernacular, we're not gonna raise the water table.
Pardon?
Any more comment language, we're not
Yes.
really raising the water table.
Well, we are right under the site, but not offsite.
And you know what I haven't really seen is that since we changed around, you know, the whole project and the recharge site, the reprogramming of Bass River is now in a future phase. But I was just wondering if you know off the top of your head, like what phase or what time frame? Because we haven't made any definitive statements on the timing of Bass River. Where before, when we were DHY, we were all over it. And now we're saying that, well, that's a future. And,
Yeah, no, the phasing hasn't changed from either of those options. The thing that changed this go round was that phase one used to be just from Parker's River towards Barnstable on Route 28, and that got expanded to be Barnstable to Dennis and added in South Shore Drive. The other phases, essentially, well, we added phases 7 and 8 to pick up Bass River more, which is 2011. But other than that, the phasing really hasn't changed.
Phases really haven't changed at all. It was the utilization of the Bass River Golf Course as a discharge area that came off the table and postponed for another 25 years.
well, that is
That's what
exactly
was.
my question.
Okay,
And-
that's
and-
what-
So that's what
Yes.
changed. And that's why the.
That
political-
was gonna be the first recharge site, if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, hang on.
But
Okay.
both of those sites were always Yarmouth's recharge.
Right, right, let's just back it up a step again and talk again about, because we need to make definitive statements about the timing of the construction of the Bass River recharge
Okay,
site. And my understanding is minimum, that's 10 years out, probably more.
yes, we believe, based on the hydrogeology report, the Buckeye Road site can handle your first 3 phases of construction. So you would need to build at Bass River prior to the start of collection at phase 4.
Because there's, I guess, significant issues. I know Bill's working with the golf department. They have a pretty detailed capital improvement plan for Bass River
That master plan, yeah.
that, basically the last time they were, we told them, well, don't do anything. That's a recharge site. They're gonna be closed down for a year. And then we sort of intimated that that's not the case, but we should formalize that with them so that they know that.
The face value, it's not tied to the phase of constructing the sewer along the Bass River. That would be phase, I'm trying to do it by memory because I don't have a map. Those are 7 and 8 Bass River phases.
That's towards the end of Bass River, right?
So that's 30 years from now. But the recharge area may kick in sooner because you need it for, as it said, after phase 4, you're going to need it. So.
But everybody's asking when.
Right.
When do you need?
So ironically, you're going to be using the recharge district before you actually sewer that area.
Right.
Well, don't forget that if they come about and actually become regulations, the new Title V regulations that are going to require you to remove 75% of the nitrogen in each of your watersheds within 20 years, that may move that time frame up.
But that's a discussion for another day.
Right.
That doesn't change phase 1.
Right, you gotta start somewhere.
I think that's all we had. Is there any other questions on anything that's been presented or otherwise?
Another thought I was having, when we talk about seasonal flows and maybe try to balance them, has anybody thought about Camp Street and Buck Island Road as maybe a sooner phase, so we can pick up a lot of those condo developments that have more year-round use as opposed to other areas? There's certainly in the watersheds that we're worried about. I'm wondering what the flow benefit is to putting a pipe down that area.
Well, wasn't that one of the condos over there, Jeff? One of the ones that we were having discussions with tying into Barnstable?
Mill Pond Village, right,
Yeah.
potentially, yeah.
Now, but my question is though, who had the conversation? Did Barnstable have the conversation with Mill Pond? Did Mill Pond have the conversation with Barnstable? I know they've been kind of breathing down our neck to get that into town, and I would rather us not give up those flows that would help our program.
There's a big trade-off. You're talking about a project on that side of Camp Street that is conducive to hooking up with Hyannis, number one, and on this side of Camp Street, less so. Like we're trying to generate flow from something that we weren't planning to treat to create a financial benefit and create a political problem.
No, I'm not.
See if I got that right.
I think the necessity to treat everything there is necessary.
We're gonna treat up until that last house. We're required to treat to reduce our TDMLs.
Right.
Why would we be suing past that?
Well, I believe it's
Bring down
already,
the
it's already in
average cost of
phases.
sewer.
I'm just saying, do we accelerate it in phase so that we get better year-round flow rates into the plant as opposed to that big high and low, that's all.
Yeah. It's actually not, if we're talking about the same condo, I know there's a lot of condos around Buck Island, but it's actually not in our plan. That Mill Pond condos, it's out of the plan.
Two different animals, man. You're
What
talking
says
about-
future phases? I'm not, if I'm reading this right,
Yeah, I know.
all this here is future phases sewer.
It's the white area.
So it's in a white area, that's not part of our plan. Currently, doesn't mean it wouldn't be in the future.
Only parts of this are not, right? So up in the presidential neighborhood there, it's not,
I know.
looks like Foxwoods is, or maybe Foxwoods too.
To create year-round flow.
I'm talking about up here.
But this part of Camp Street and Buck Island is all in here. I'm just saying, is it worthwhile to think about moving this area up a little bit so that you get better
Right. And
balance flow?
Village really does this.
I'm not talking about just Mill Pond Village. I understand that. I'm just saying,
Yeah, way back when we talked a little bit about this by petition, right? If the sewer lines in the neighborhood and they call us up and say, can you hook us up? And take it into consideration, but to plan for it, you don't need to treat that effluent to reduce your TDMS.
Or I guess the way I would look at it is town needs to focus on the first phase, get that built, and while that's being built, the town needs to focus on what do you really want phase 2 to look like. And
everything
when
else.
phase 2 is being built, focus on what you think the next phase 3. I'll guarantee it's not gonna be built the way it's shown right here.
Right.
Oh, I agree. I've been saying for years, I envision a phase 1 and then a phase 2A, 2B, 3AB, whatever it is. I think you're gonna see certain neighborhoods that want it bad enough they'll pay for it and they'll get moved up. That's
We
my
asked this
feeling.
question previously. There's a selection of phasing done based on the amount of flow we generate to create the financial, excuse the phrase, flow again to fund the project's operation.
Yeah.
I think the more time goes on, all that conversation goes out the window because West Yarmouth, Lewis Bay, which would have been a year-round community 5 years ago, 5 years from now, probably isn't going to.
Right, that's why I mentioned all the
So we're
condos.
becoming less year-round.
When you look at all the condos, they tend to be, I know they're not all, but they tend to be more year-round use than some of these other areas that we look at. They're very similar. All right. Next,
Just a question on the schedule, easements and other things that the town has to approve. We want to be able to get those in here, so I've seen a blanket ruling that basically says the board of selectmen can include all of them. I don't know how they work it here, but lay down areas, other areas we want to start early and capture, so we're not using only a handful of lay down areas and dragging pipe up and down the corridor, things like that. So some of that, and then I know traffic planning usually goes to the contractor, but we probably want to have an early dialogue to make sure we understand detouring, so we tell the contractor where it's going to go. Some neighborhoods know it's not going to go through their neighborhood or whatever, in terms of delivery materials, where we're going to store all this stuff. On the
Which
corridor,
Also
or
speaks to the
manatees.
public information campaign.
Yeah.
How we can get this word out to everybody.
Last thing in the schedule, in terms of the overall schedule, when do we run out of the money we have, so we know what to then, so Bob, we have some cash from, ARPA money. Do we use that first and delay our borrowing, so that if we know what, based on our upcoming contracts for design and everything else, and this one that you've got, Lou, it says notice to proceed on the top, I think it's the second schedule, that one, where do we run out of the money that we have for authorizations And then we pick up the ARPA cash because it goes away in 2024. So if you look at the schedule, that block and final design is probably the place we dump all our ARPA money, so we don't have to start borrowing all the way. So those are the kind of things that we want to embed in this schedule, so we know. Because I've been burned in easement projects that, you know, everybody runs in and says, oh, we need these, we're gonna start bidding, and they're not on the plans, or they're not approved, so stuff like that would be helpful. So,
How close is the town on its financing plan? I know there are a few holes left to plug. Are they anywhere closer to being solved, or?
it's on that, like a town hall, it's that close.
That's not far away.
So, Diff is, the consultant is gonna start working on the phase 2 of that, which is the percentage calculation next week, and better than we already have a consultant, so. And then I'm working with somebody in DEP to see if they can convince MassWorks to release some money after the meeting with DEP. Start talking to them about trying to get, you know, a MassWorks program specifically for sewer. So.
All right, anybody have anything else?
Future discussion, we got sewer regs in the packet.
Those are land use controls. That's the draft that CDM Smith has done. If there's any thoughts. That's also the meeting we're gonna have on September 7th to start that kind
I
of.
don't want to get into it now. I'm just curious. This was done. This was done a couple of years ago.
In 2020, yes.
So that we're starting point for the
Right.
discussion.
Right, so the key issues that we need to get into is that how the flow can be allocated and reallocated.
Lots of sewer use regulations and land use, two different things. You might work together.
The land use controls will become a section in your sewer use regulations, which cover your whole sewer system program, how things are built.
So the draft that you have is what gets submitted to DEP. There's obviously gonna be a lot more, probably another 40, 50 pages of sewer regulations that don't get submitted as part of that. Land use controls.
Yeah, but I think the original sewer use controls, some of what I remember seeing had to do more with the construction and installation of various parts of it, as opposed to
That's the,
where it's going and how much flow and things like that.
those are other sections, right?
Right, such as, you know, if a homeowner, when they go to do their house connection, are you going to require them to have a professional engineer design it, or does Title V soil evaluator or builder, and they do it type of thing? It's gonna also dictate, you know, how much time does a homeowner have to connect? Is it a year, is it 2 years? What's that policy you're gonna set? So that's will be in your sewer use regulations. The land use controls are just one section in your regulations.
Yeah, because and again, I know we're not here to talk about it, but I remember one thing, two things that stuck in my head was with Howard's regulations was the distance from the building, because the plumbing code dictates that already. And I would like to see a cleanup, outside cleanup on every sewer time.
And that's in those regulations.
So I think we make sure things like that are in there, so that for future serviceability, we don't have problems.
So some of those types of regulations are really, there's a lot of choice in them. They could range from 0 to 100. Who's driving that conversation?
Town staff is working on kind of a template of what that will look like, and then we'll present it to the committee.
And we're drawing from just generally everybody's professional take on it.
Other towns that we're familiar with.
That's what we're kind of getting at.
All the DPW staff is working in other communities that already have sewers.
So you came from Chatham, and his rule of thumb, Chatham's connection policy was 2 years from the date it came by your property. That's a start.
Right. And we've already been talking with
That's not
Bruce
an
about
absolute.
that. Right.
Right. But we were attempting to give consideration to folks' life of the current septic system. at the same time. So it can't be as rigid as date plus 2 years.
The Board of Health normally deal with that. The light, not the sewer commission.
Right, they typically would, but
Yeah.
we can try to craft
You
something.
couldn't get off the hook in Chadwick with a drainage system. It's a sewer line came by the property. So you're up $30,000 plus the connection, as opposed to being year 28 every year and saying, great, I don't have to put a new septic system in because I just got a sewer line. So I'm just suggesting we got to really take that into consideration if you want to get this, all of this stuff through a public that's going to feel the pinch sooner rather than later. I think those are the types of questions you're getting at public meetings.
That happens in every community, to be honest, because you're never gonna avoid it, no matter when you build a sewer, you're gonna pass someone that had to put in a new Title V system within the last couple of
We're
years.
not going to wait 15 years to hook up just because your system's only half
That's
half
correct.
years old. But there's got to be a formula where you take, how many years you got left, divide by 5 and call it.
So one community I dealt with, they said, okay, the requirement is 2 years after the sewer comes and fine, if your system, if you just put in a new Title V system within the last 5 years, we'll give you an extra 2 years on top of it, you know what I mean? So
Right, I mean, that's the
that-
kind of stuff we should be having a conversation.
It's always an issue. Now, you have to weigh that here though versus it's a different situation on the Cape and that you, the town, are required to remove so much nitrogen within a certain time frame. So you can't just keep pushing away. Engine on chemicals.
No
That's
question.
why Chatham and Howard originally had 1 year to connect.
Yeah, but also
They both stretched it back to 2 years.
you can run the pro
Just-
forma and see what the request can be. Most neighborhoods now are over 30 years old, so they're on their second systems. How deep is that? You can run the numbers and see what you're likely to get in as reduction in the, or what's the right word? You're likely to get, if you can figure it out mathematically, what you can and can't do based on the flow that you need. And come up with a number, whether it's 3 years, 2 years, lifespan divided by 5 years, lifespan, if it's more than 15, go to 3, let's pick a number and plug it in and see how it plays out. So you still get the flow that you're gonna need to reduce the TMLs when they're supposed to have been reduced by. I just don't want to have the guys who are going to be most injured by this financially taking over the conversation. Because they'll rile up the folks who aren't going to be injured by this financially.
That's why I asked the question at DEP meeting about interim measures, instead of forcing somebody to put in, pick a number, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 system, and then in 3 years you tell them, too bad, fill it in. That's where you're gonna have problem getting this through to people,
You're talking AI now?
any system.
Oh, any system. Yeah.
So let's say my system is not so happy. Do I really need to put a complete system to get me through the next 2 years until the sewer comes? That's my point.
That's what the Board of Health is for.
Right.
Those
I
kind of.
I asked the
issues.
question and I did it on purpose so that the health department and the DEP were there, and hopefully between the two of them, they can figure out absolutely not, or maybe there's a way we can do something, which is, I would hope the second option will be like this.
Well, given your phase one is commercial and the residents will see activity on 28 and be confident that it's going to come up into the neighborhoods, then I think you have a more distinct advantage that they maybe won't put in the new system and Board of Health, but because there are commercial properties that have brand new systems out there now, they're just gonna have to face,
Right, they're hundreds of thousands of dollars.
right.
Right, and that's, again, if you can't, whether it be a 3-bedroom house or a 100-unit motel, if we can't accommodate them, they will push back because you either can't or won't be able to afford both options. You can afford one or the other, but not both.
I don't see how a commercial entity will want to wait a few years to connect when they, so
No, I'm
I
just
think
saying,
they're gonna go to ground with this thing as soon as they can.
my point is, some of these systems are marginal. So instead of saying to that person, and to, whether it's a company or a family, you have to go put full-blown Title V in, and then they spend whatever the number is, And then you come down the street with a pipe, they're gonna fight against you. Actually, will probably show up and vote against you even getting this project.
Right, but I guess my point is, you'll have a few years where you prove the veracity of the municipality to move ahead. And the people in phase two will start asking the Board of Health, it looks like I'm gonna be there in 2 years,
Yeah.
so can I hold off?
That's
And
my
that's,
point.
that's the policy is really at the Board of
But the
Health.
constituencies are very different, right?
Right.
No matter how good the system is under 28, that would normally be one vote, but that vote doesn't even come to town.
Right.
No, again, if you're in the neighborhood, you're talking about hundreds of votes coming to town. So we gotta be careful of the homeowner.
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking about everyone. So, and I understand what you're saying with the homeowner, because they're the ones who are least likely to afford both options. Right? They can't afford to go potentially borrow money to put a septic system in, and then you come down the street with betterments and hookup fees. It's not gonna happen.
Right.
That's all I'm thinking.
Our schedules are gonna give them plenty of time.
Yeah.
To consider that.
I'm just looking for an interim between moment. And again, my point was, if we vote on this next April, so we know we're going forward. From that point to construction date or finish date, what can we do to accommodate people who don't need to put a full-blown Title V system in place? But
So we can
Use
get
is
more
what it-
connections.
Exactly.
Right.
Sooner.
That's what we need.
Right.
All right. So regulatory permitting, we're all set with everything?
Yes.
Okay. Now, RAC neighborhood meetings.
Kyle and I came up with a plan, which is in the package. Don't get that.
Yes, so we have it once a month for 4 months.
No.
No?
So it was an emailed package. I have it, but if you wanted to look, we'll share it. I'll pass it around. We were looking at creating sufficient number of neighborhood meetings so that people could plug in with some ownership, thinking that they were going to be talking about not the system completely as a whole, but the one that would most directly affect them. So we broke it up in terms of watersheds. And we spread them out over the next 4 months, September through December. And we pushed the meeting locations into those villages. So we came up with this schedule. Pass it around if you want, but something that got emailed with the agenda and the package today. The general principle was to make it possible for some of us to attend, to gather that feedback and try to answer the most basic questions. We didn't foresee this as something that is going to be technical in nature, something along the levels of what we do at our meetings, but just to try to answer some of the more basic questions, primarily, when and how much. We meet on the first Monday of the month. That's traditional meeting dates, so we chose the third Monday of the month as the meeting for the neighborhood meetings. Chose 5 o'clock to hopefully give folks enough time to get there from work if they work, but not too late. So if they think they're going to stay out late for this meeting, they don't think they're going to run more than an hour or so, unless they're so well attended and the discussions want to continue. And we moved them into the village that was most conducive to that watershed. So we're at the Realtors Association, we're at the Cultural Center, we're at the Senior Center, and we're at the Fire Department up on the port as well. Depending on our interest as RAC members to attend, we may or may not be required to make this a public meeting. So because there's 4 of them, and I don't think everybody wants to go to all of them, if you choose the neighborhood meeting that is most relevant to you, so if you live in South Yarmouth, you want to go to the South Yarmouth one, and the West Yarmouth and so on, and we keep our RAC numbers to 3. I don't think 4 is quorum. No, we had a question on whether 4 is a quorum. If we keep our numbers to 3 or 4, then it's not posted meeting, but it's still something that we would have to promote and let the public know is happening, because we want them there. We want to come and participate. at your discretion though, if you'd rather make these attempt to have everybody there for whatever reason or benefit that might create. We could post these as meetings, although Kyle tells me we're required to hook them up and broadcast them now. Make them available online. So that might be a technical issue as we push these out to these other locales. We're in a bit of agreement that they need a little bit of a setup because otherwise the conversation won't get going. But I don't think we need a full-fledged. Where are we now? Most people who are starting to tune into this are still way at the beginning. What are we doing? And we kind of need to just give them the basics. And as their questions start to be generated more organically, I think that's when we start to take their temperature and see what it is that they're thinking about, what we're going to need to push out going forward is more information. I hate to sound cliches, it's going to be a listening session, it might be Q&A, but it's definitely not a technical download of what is happening at the moment. You can plug into these if you want that kind of level of information. But I don't think we would be accomplishing very much if we had half a dozen people each meeting who want to get into the nitty-gritty. We need several dozen people, if not scores of people, to come to these things and just sort of start having those kind of conversations we're going to need to get us through town meetings going forward. I think our plan was that you guys might be able to get this, like, the sign off on this tomorrow. And notice if that was an agenda item or not. To the degree that it's sponsored by the town, I wouldn't want to be out there without, town's crematoriums. In terms of publicizing it, I think Tom was going to speak to you guys about putting it on our website and then pushing it out to the town's email list. Kyle generated an additional neighborhood or civic association list that once we have the town invitation, we would distribute to those organizations. They number, I think, 29 in all. So it's a pretty good outreach effort to try to get some people to attend this.
Tom, it was you that sent on the list recently, correct? So here's some of the neighborhood associations. Lewisville Watershed. I thought a couple others. And I would think we could use the Friends of Barrington Chamber to also help with the people up. Now you said 5 o'clock, yeah, but the packet says 4 o'clock for these meetings.
That might be Kyle, but it's your discretion.
I'd rather we go, I don't know, 2 but a little later so people can have the time maybe get out of work and get there. for those
Yeah,
who
I
work.
mean, let's be honest, we made it for to split the difference between the folks who chose to be here and the folks who have to be here. I'm a product of the 80s when we had meetings at 7 p.m. and they ran until midnight.
That sounds like a
We tend not to do that. We tend not to do that anymore. It's in a position.
Yeah.
But you do want to give folks a chance to go home from work without the excuse of saying, well, I have to leave work early to come to these things.
I just might remind that we did this a few years ago. 3 or 4 meetings around town. There was several of them, not all of them. I was at a number of them. I recall over and over again 2 questions: how quickly can you get to me, and what's it going to cost? It was very, very little pushback.
Until we get to town meeting.
Yeah, I remember participating in those as well. One was at the Culture Center, one was at the Board of Realtors. We had some real, I won't call it technical per se, but it was a very substantive conversation. One was with the state official explaining why we needed to do what we needed to do. And typically what you get at those are folks who want the sewer. I'm anticipating getting the folks who don't want the sewer at these and trying to figure out how we're going to create a productive dialogue with those people. I'm just looking for that list. It's here somewhere, but it's a very substantial list added to it. It's not already on there. But Kyle, I guess, is the keeper of those list of town halls, so it's pretty comprehensive.
I have just a couple of suggestions or maybe discussion points. In terms of the outreach, each of these watersheds are kind of linked in some way to each of the contracts. And there seem to me to be two sets of constituencies here. One, the actual property owners who are in the contracts. And then obviously the surrounding neighborhoods where we don't know when the sewer will be coming or how much it's going to cost if you live, down Berry Avenue. We just don't know that. But for those property owners at the intersection of 28 and Berry Avenue, they're in contract number 5, right?
So you're drilling down into
I'm just thinking of.
phase 1, right? All of what you're looking at is phase 1 there.
Yeah, well, that's what we know most about.
Right, but phase 1 transcends 3 watersheds. So we were looking at the original, our original consideration was phase 1's going to come up at every single meeting for a number of reasons. One, because it's in every watershed. So even though the Lewis Bay meeting is in September, we're talking about hopefully getting the folks from the Lewis Bay watershed to attend. They have a pretty significant portion of the 28 in that watershed. Generally speaking, phase 1 is the easiest thing to talk about because it's supposed to start it next year and it's going to take 3 years to finish, give or take.
Yeah, phase 1 with 6 contracts. Am I understanding the phase and I don't want to, I sometimes confuse myself. We're talking about phase 1 and the 6 contracts that run up the full length of 28. So when I saw your notes here on the watersheds, I said, well, which contracts are most closely linked to these watersheds? And how much information will we know about those specific contracts that are aligned with these watersheds? Because those might be the constituencies who show up.
I don't know how best to address it, but in last month's meeting, we broke these meetings down by phases. So we know that the first one in September for Lewis Bay is phases 1, 2, 3. The second one in Bass River with the Cultural Center is 1, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we've kind of already broken them down like that. The other one you really can't break down is the 4th one in the Yarmouth Port because let's be honest, that's really a taxpayers conversation.
I understand. So your idea was to talk about all 4 phases.
So the most
So
relevant
like a
phases,
10,000-foot flyover to give everybody kind of a good view of where we are right now, a snapshot.
So that's
What do we know about it? What can we tell you about it? And some things we know a lot about. And there's some things we don't know anything. And I think we need to be able to say that.
we're going to completely stump us. I didn't want to get off your point though, that first meeting is really going to be about phases 1, 2, and 3.
Okay,
The West Yarmouth one.
okay.
Once we move to the October one, they're going to want to know when 5, 6, 7, and 8 are going to come online, right? They're not so concerned about phase 2 and 3 because they don't live with it.
But you did, just one point, if you don't get phase 1 approved at town meeting, you don't have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So the only thing we should talk about is getting phase 1 approved at town meeting with the treatment plant, and that the things will be adapt to where we're moving as we move forward, but they should be impressed upon the, if you're gonna worry about your phase 4, worry about phase 1. If you're gonna worry about your phase 3, worry about phase 1, because it's the treatment plant, it's the trunk lines, and that's it. And then the second thing is you have to tell them about the June 1 letter. That's gonna be the difficult discussion, because frankly, you can't leave the room and not tell them, oh, by the way, if this doesn't happen, you're all gonna pony up 30 grand or so. So those are the 2 things. I don't think we should try to guess where they're going to be, when they're, and how much it's gonna cost, because if they want sewer, if you don't do phase 1, none of it matters.
Well, I guess that's part of my point. I know it's getting late. I don't need to linger on this, but what is the purpose of this communication? Is it directly to get the voice out and advocate for town meeting in the spring? Get the word out, get people positively thinking about this, however we do that, and be the public advocates to get this first step, this vote done. Isn't that the most important thing we have to do first?
So I would say no.
Okay.
Okay, this is why I was arguing for this type of
Conversation.
outreach or public conversation, public, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to go in there and tell them what they have to know, and I'm definitely not suggesting we tell them or else, because I'm just gonna lose them. Why do you want to go to a meeting where somebody says, if you don't do this, you're gonna be forced to do that? I want to be available to folks to ask us questions. Hopefully we can answer. And if we can't, I'm very comfortable saying, we don't know. We can't answer that. Thank you for the question. It's what's most relevant to you or what's on your mind. It's probably relevant to a lot of other people as well. We'll try to address it at the next meeting or put out some public communication that addresses your concern. I don't know if we can break it down to answering everybody's individual questions, but no offense. That's exactly what I don't want to do with these things.
You can't leave the room without telling about the letter because it's a public sector meeting. That's the most important thing that's happened.
So where that plays into the conversation, when somebody says, why do we have to do this? That's probably a good response, part of the response. But to lead off a presentation or a slideshow with or else.
No, it's not a lead. It's just the point being is when you go out to inform people, there are certain parameters that you have to give them. And one of them was we were issued a notice from DEP that this is the implication for all your residents. If you put it at the beginning, the middle, the end of the presentation, you can't leave the room unless you tell them that this is happening because they don't know. And when they hear later on that this is happening, they'll ask, why the hell didn't they tell me? Because that's usually what happens at these public meetings is later on, they get upset that you held something back.
I wouldn't characterize us holding anything back. We're there to give them as much information as we can, and specifically the one that they asked for. We can internally debate what the DEP's mandate means and how far they're willing to take it. Because I can argue just as forcefully that they ain't never going to enforce it, no matter what. There's no way you shut down a town or a portion of the town that doesn't comply. You force them to go forward with a plan that they've come up with and maybe go faster. But it's not within the realm of possibility that they shut down the town. It's not moving forward.
I would agree with that. They could hold every single septic permit in abeyance. Nobody could do any development.
That's
They could shut
no,
down.
right.
No, that could.
So
be
nobody
a
flushes their
single-family
toilet
home.
because they went to court and said shut it down. And all the work we do to get our state reps and state senators elected to elect these new governors and appoint the folks to these agencies, that means nothing in the process. Town of, one of the towns or a portion of the town is going to be shut down if you go forward fast enough.
It's not the efficacy of the threat. It is the fact that there is a letter issued to the town and the town's obligation is to tell the public that that letter has been issued to the town. Whether you soft sell it or not, you have to tell them.
I feel like I opened up this can of worms, so I apologize. What I do want to get back to, Spiro, is, and what you started with was the mission, the charge of this committee. And the listening idea of this is exactly what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to listen to what the people are saying about this project and bring it back to the Board of Selectmen and let them know what we're hearing from the public, good and bad, about what they think about this. And if that's kind of the shape of the format of these meetings, we give them as much information as we know is at this point without drilling down. And listen to what they have to say about it. And then our duty is to report back what we're hearing from the public. If I read the charge right, tonight, which you handed out for us, that's a relatively straightforward focus task. Is it okay for us to be advocates for it? Of course. I think it is.
And individually.
Yeah, I think it's okay for us to be the advocates, but we're here to hear what you think.
We've come a long way in our individual take on the issue, our understanding of the issue, to a point where some of us who were saying, man, $400 million is going to break the town, to where we really know that $400 million is a required and maybe a wise investment for the town to go forward for another 100, 200 years. We have to translate that sort of notion to folks that we've done the homework. We're not asking you to trust us, but we're much further along in our development in the knowledge of this issue. And we are recommending this to the folks who ask us to look at the issue, the selection. And we're trying to move the project forward. But ultimately, 24,000 people, 14,000 homeowners, and maybe 7,000 affected properties. Really, the ones who are going to bear the brunt of this, they've just got to be brought much deeper in the conversation to be able to affect what we're trying to affect here. Otherwise, you're going to start getting these smaller pockets of opposition. And when you do need a more broad consensus, like a town meeting, you're going to derail it. And all through, but we didn't have a chance to listen to them, figure out what their concern or problem. Don's right. And these folks start shaking and saying, hurry up, let's get this done. I can't wait to hook up. That's the answer we bring back. Folks are coming back and specifically asking for when's my hookup? Well, section 4, 15 years from now, whatever phase they happen to be in. By then, there'll be hookup charges and there'll be betterment fees. And we'll probably have a better understanding of what the actual cost is. Let's be honest, water fees are going to go up generally to pay for some of this, as well as the individual sewer fees that the folks who are incurring that are going to pay for. So do we know what those are? No, but it would be fair to apprise them of those issues. Just so when it happens, it doesn't prevent us from going forward at that point.
Anything else?
Just so we know it's only 4 weeks away, give or take, right, 4 weeks from now. This is something we can post. Administration can move forward and say, yes, putting this on the calendar and putting it on the site. To folks who receive emails from the town.
Yeah, the selectmen have no issue with it, then I think there's a whole bunch of avenues we have to get the word out. Work on that.
You want to put it on the selectmen's agenda?
Yeah.
If you think we can move it unilaterally,
Maybe it's
that
a
works for us.
consent agenda type thing. Just to.
Yeah.
okay what we want.
Yeah, they're meeting on the 30th.
Maybe the public comment period. I mean, we've
Yeah.
used that as a place to advise the board of upcoming things. And,
Yeah, there's a
Maybe
public
some-
comment tomorrow night.
Yeah, they're coming, they're meeting tomorrow. The agenda is already posted, but you can come under public comment, talk about the schedule for information meetings. I'm sure they'd be happy here.
We'll do that for starters, then maybe put on the 30th for their official blessing. Go from there.
And then you'll have to get notices out quick in advance of that.
Friends of Pastor, I don't see anybody here. Past meeting minutes. I did speak to Kyle about the 18th, I believe, the DEP meeting. I asked him to include that I had made mention of what we've talked about is some kind of stopgap measures for people who will be on sewers rather than having to force them to put a complete Title V system in. So I'm just asking Kyle to amend the minutes to show that. And then Mark Galkowski was present in the room. He just asked that he noticed that he was there. Other than that, does anybody have any questions, comments, or amendments to the minutes of June, I guess it was June 27th? Or July 18th, I'm sorry.
I have one
got it backwards, so.
I have one comment on July
Yeah.
18th. When Friends of Esper, when Rick Bishop did talk about the bloom and he showed us that photograph,
Mhm.
that was not south of the Bass River Bridge. That was in an inlet
Something
south of the Cape Cod Rail Trail
Right,
Bridge.
near Kelly's Bay or
Yeah,
something. in there,
no,
right?
it was south of that, but
Oh, okay.
there's a little.
I wondered about that too. I thought it
No,
was north of
it's,
the bridge.
yeah, it's right, it's the Cape Cod Rail Trail.
Okay, so we have that. And that was July 18th, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so.
The July 18th meeting also, I left at 5:32, not at 5 PM.
So was it June 20, June 27th was a DEP meeting, correct? Yeah, okay, so does anybody have any questions or comments on June 27th, which was the DEP meeting first? Do we care to make a motion?
I'll move it.
Okay, George, anybody second?
Second.
Roll call, no more discussion, right? Anybody got anything to say about those minutes? George?
Aye.
Spiro?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Mary?
Aye.
Aye, okay, very good. Now, July 18th.
We have any more for is no, item number 4 on July 18th. South of the railroad bridge.
Yeah, I've got that in my note, I'll talk to Kyle. It wasn't south of the Vassar, it was south of the rail trail. Okay. So with that, and having Mark Alkowski out as in attendance, do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
so
I move we approve the minutes with the correction that I left at 5:32.
Again, all those in favor, myself, aye.
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Spiro,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Mary.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, very good. We got that taken care of. Future meeting dates and agenda items. What we have next, we have any more regulatory type updates we need to do soon? We're getting pretty under control now.
I think we should regularly have the schedule, the design update, and the permitting update, at least until we get through the certificate and all that.
Set milestones, maybe just rough numbers. What action do we have coming up on fall town meeting? Anything? I know the big work is in the spring.
I think what we talked about for fall town, there might be some financial related, if there's any need to move money. into
Yeah,
the
we're gonna
enterprise
be
or-
on the interim financial plan. They're still moving money from free cash, so we'll probably be doing some pre-funding.
Okay. So nothing we have to worry about right away. Mary, could you unmute yourself? Did you miss a Board of Health meeting tonight for this? Or did you not have a meeting?
The Board of Health is probably still meeting. It was a longer agenda, but I wanted to hear particularly about the.
Unmuted, but.
Speakers on that?
Could be a speaker. Sorry, might be something on our end I can't hear. My question was, and maybe I'll work it out with Kyle and Bruce on Board of Health meetings to make sure we're not conflicting with those meetings in the future.
Okay, that'd be great.
All right, so we'll work on that. Anybody have anything else? Motion to adjourn? Do you second that?
I'll second.
Dave? All in favor, George?
Aye.
Spiro?
Aye.
John? Tom? Myself, aye. Mary? I
Aye.
assume aye. Thank you. Thank you all very much for your time. I appreciate it.
George, is anything on the note that there's no meeting? Yeah. Second, second. Have it too. No, the September 7th.
That's correct.
Yeah, it should be.